it was like a traditional Mexican household, I suppose, for the most part. My mother had been. My mother was like a traditional Mexican housewife, and my father was the breadwinner. He worked in construction, so when she was 16, they got together, and that's all she's known pretty much her entire life. She dropped out of high school to raise children and cook and clean and do that. You know, that's just how that was. So it was very much that. It was as simple as that. My mom was a stay-at-home wife, and my dad went out and did construction, came home, spent what time he could with us, rinse, repeat. It's kind of hard. Well, a lot of stuff is hard for me to remember, but like from what as far as I could tell, everything seemed to be fine for the most part. When my father died, and my mom didn't really know what to do. She did whatever she could do. Me and my brothers and my sisters, you know, we all still were pretty tight-knit, but the rest of the family that my father spoke with and, you know, kept us all communicating and together and, like, going on vacations to go visit them all, that just quite literally disappeared. We had vacations to Texas to go, like, see family. All of a sudden, I never went back there to see any of them ever again. And at that point, it was really just as simple as my mother doing everything she could to try and raise, especially even just her three main children, her three children specifically, by herself. I didn't know what to do. That was like my first actual understanding of the existence of death, like the end of a person and that you'll never get to see them again. And it blew my mind. Like it broke me on a certain level. She didn't really know. She definitely was not prepared to deal with a young child that had to deal with the loss of his father, while at the same time dealing with trying to, like, keep everything afloat, keep a roof over our heads, keep food in our mouth. So at that point, then I started to, that's when I started to think about a lot of things. I started to think about, you know, like, what's going to happen if I die? Well, if my father is in heaven, then could I just go be with my father? And so then I started to want to die myself, just so that I could go be with my dad in heaven. But it was like I was 10 years old. There was not really much in my mind that, you know, things made sense on a level of simplicity. Well, the problems had kind of started around there, because when I wanted to die, then I became ridiculously self-destructive. And I lived in kind of a rough neighborhood, and so I spent a lot of time running around in the streets and be like I was slowly but surely becoming a little hoodlum. My brother especially had a lot of trouble. My sister, of course, she went through her fair share of stress, but she didn't really like, not like me and my brother. Though I can't really say, because I wasn't really paying attention to her. I was too busy lamenting or whatever I did. Yeah. But my brother did a bit, and he tried to keep me straight. He kept on trying to do that thing where he was like, "Don't do what I'm doing," but then I was like, "But you're doing it.
Yeah.
Why can't I do it?" So I did it. And then I tried to, in order to really prove myself, I had to try and do it twice as hard too. So then that's ridiculous self-destruction in those ages, and it didn't really stop. It just got worse. And it was a few times where I attempted, so I tried to hang myself. I tried to kill myself once. And I tied a rope around my neck, and I gave a little leap, and the rope was way too long, because I wasn't thinking ahead about anything like that, because I was like 10 years old, around 10 or 11 years old. At 10 years old, I do specifically remember, like, just wandering around the streets at night. I would sneak out. I would go hang out with all the guys that just walk around in the streets. They would get drunk. They would do drugs. And they thought that it was really funny to have this little kid get drunk and do drugs. So I used to just get drunk and do drugs with guys in the street. Though I do have a faint memory of someone, like, giving me acid at some point, like when I was 10 years old. They thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
I thought it was hilarious too, but in a weird way. It was a very interesting experience.
Like the joke's on you.
Yeah, I guess kind of. I have trouble remembering that. It was very weird. I regret it. I really wish that had not happened, like, at all. I ended up drinking a lot, though. Actually, now that I remember, that memory is fuzzy. I drank a lot, even especially in high school. I drank a ton. I was known for being a terrible lush. So nowadays, I don't really drink anymore at all. Partially because, like, it got really bad back in those days. Like I was often very drunk, even just near the end of high school. As time progressed, and I had gotten used to living a life that was very much like that, where you know, in my mind, after a while of being a part of it all, you start to not really think that getting drunk or doing drugs at that age is a really big deal. You don't even really think of it as being illegal because it's just the things that you do every day. So then I would do it. There was a handful of stealing. In the younger ages, especially the teenage ages, got pretty bad too. But more in the days when I started to not have a home to sleep in anymore and started having trouble finding food, then I would do whatever I could in order to do that. So sometimes I would steal random knickknacks from some place and then bring it to. There was a guy that I knew who worked at a McDonald's, and he would have me just bring him some stuff so that he would give me food for it. And I was like, oh well, I'm hungry today. Let's go take some stuff and bring it to that guy for like a double quarter pounder. I remember pretty distinctly when I was 15, my mom and I got into a pretty bad fight, and it was one of those things where I was like, well, I can do whatever the fuck I want. I'm a big boy. And she was like, well, then get out. You know, she was pretty angry, and so then I left, and then the same thing would just kind of happen over and over again. Like I might end up getting a job, and then I'll be at that job for a little while, and then I might blow a little bit of money irresponsibly, and she would get ridiculously pissed off, and then she would kick me out. And then, but a large amount of money I would give to her, and I would be like, wow, it would be neat if I could have had that money to stay somewhere or do something. And then I would lose the job because then nobody would let me stay at their place, or they might have even for a period of time, but then kicked me out because I may have been a jerk or done something. Most likely it was my fault at the point, I felt like. At least I feel like now. But after a while, yeah, it really just kept on happening over and over again, and it ended up being a cycle, like an endless cycle, to the point to where there was a point to where I consciously decided just simply never to go back again because it would happen again. But during the day, the majority of the time I spent it at the mall. At the night, I spent it at Denny's. And the rest of the time I spent it wherever I could go, just wandering, catching a ride with a random person, practically hitchhiking around town. It gets a little fuzzy because that chunk in time is all smushed together into a big foggy mess, and so there was plenty of times where there was quite literally just nowhere to go, and those places normally were normally if it was in the summertime or the springtime, fall, wasn't really so bad, but when it got around winter time, then that's when it got bad. But you know, weeks on end I would end up having to just sleep outside. There were points in time where I would spend many weeks just outside. Every once in a while I would try and sleep in like a shelter, but one time in a shelter I woke up with a guy just about to wring my neck, and so I never went back to a shelter from then ever again. He had his hands just right here at my neck, and I woke up and I stared at him, and he looked very surprised. And then he started screaming, "I'm sorry," over and over and over again, and then started pacing, and I left. And I never went back to a homeless shelter ever again. The other times, then I would just walk around and go, you know, sometimes I would randomly meet people, and these people would think that I'm pretty cool, and so then they would take me off to random parties, and then we would just hang out and get stoned and get drunk and play video games or do whatever. I'd find myself at a lot of random places of people that I had just met that very day. It's because I'm a talker, I guess, for the most part. Then I would always talk and just tell weird stories about what was going on, and then I would let them know that I didn't have a place to stay or whatever, and so they would kind of enjoy hanging out. And I guess, you know, I would usually just be like, hey, you know, may I please have some food? Could you like get me a little something? And so I never really usually directly asked for money, because the only things that I really cared about was just getting the food. I only really got money if I needed food, if I wasn't already at a food establishment that somebody could just buy me food at. Sometimes I would find myself in places in strange towns, like I wouldn't even know where I was at all, but just in a house full of junkies, just doing nothing all the time for long periods. But eventually someone would flip out about something or other, or I might get in trouble because I slept with someone's girl or something like that. And then, you know, the shit hits fan, and then you gotta leave again. And it was a lot of stuff like that over and over again. I had gotten into, with the whole thing with kind of starting to steal stuff, and you know, all of those people, they had me like, you know, things would escalate, and they would try and do worse things. They would try and steal more expensive things, and I would rope in with the rest of them, because as far as I was concerned, life, like, I just wanted to die. And so all of these things was like, who cares? I didn't care about anything. Which, let me tell you, is the #1 way to reduce anxiety, because if you don't really care, then you're not anxious about anything. The thing. So yeah, that's one thing that I kind of became very well known for, was for being like ridiculously reckless and crazy, because I was looking to die. And it got to a point to where I even started fighting for money. You know, I was a really big kid, and there was a handful of guys that had gambling addictions, and they had like a ring in some basement type place where they used to just get a bunch of guys together and beat the shit out of each other for money. And I was a rather resilient young man. I could throw a good punch, and so I used to do a lot of that, and it used to be pretty good money. The end of that kind of came. I fought a dude who had biceps like the size of my skull, and he cracked one of my ribs. He had to have. I took a shot. Man, his fists were like bricks. Were like bricks on his wrists, and he hurt me bad. And that was, and I didn't really want to go back after that. I did a few times, but it wasn't really very good, because all anybody had to do was hit me in the rib, and then everything was over. Got into a lot of fights for money. I'd gotten in a lot of escalated situations where I had made a handful of enemies, and people wanted to hurt me, whether it would be over money or whether it would be over some sort of deal gone bad or something like that, or if I even just pissed off somebody, or if I looked at somebody wrong. Usually people in the streets, when they get into things like that, it doesn't take much to set them off. Usually they're not really the brightest crayons in the book, and they have all sorts of issues. Like, I ended up making friends with a guy who was like, he was a punk, and he was in a punk organization called SHARP, which is Skinheads Against Racist Punk. So, but being friends with this guy ended up making me enemies with that handful of people too. And so there was a point in time where I was just walking down the street, and a bunch of those guys just picked me up and threw me in the van, and just beat the daylights out of me with loud punk music going on in the background, and driving around like crazy. And eventually it had gotten to a point, like, they hit me in the temple and the room spun, and then I just collapsed on the ground, curled up into a ball, while they kicked the daylights out of me. They just kept kicking me like in the face, that I just had to cover up. And eventually they just opened up the back doors, and then they took their boot and just slid me right out the back doors, and I tumbled on the street for a moment there in the dead of night, crawled to the side, and took myself a breather. There was plenty of situations like that would happen. I usually end up getting into fights sometimes with dude with knives. I carried a couple of knives on me for the reason of, possibly getting into a scuffle with something might be serious, and yeah, people got cut up pretty bad. I've got a handful of scars myself. Yeah, no, there was a good handful of violence and all that. Part of it still kind of my fault, I feel like. Well, at the same time, not. It's so hard to debate exactly what was going on. I was kind of purposefully getting myself into really reckless situations because of the situations that I had put myself into, kind of. And but at the same time, after having burned my bridges and felt like completely and totally rejected by society, I suppose, they like I felt like at the same time I didn't really have a choice anymore. Like I felt very ostracized by everybody else. People would kind of give me the time of day. People would think I was a little weird, so they wouldn't talk to me anymore. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just felt like that there was nothing else that I could do except just kind of be in the streets. I would often think to myself that I was probably going to be out there, and then as much as I wanted to die, like I would think about, like, this is it. This is going to be every single day. It's just going to be similar to this and full of maybe some random junk, and then somehow I'm going to die. I was hoping that somebody would kill me. And then the few times that I actually had a serious brush with death, I felt the pure fear of death. Like, that possible instinct inside of me had kicked in, finally. There was a couple of times where it really didn't. But finally there was a point when I was cut up and I was bleeding pretty bad that I was still fighting, and I remember seeing the white start to cave in the edge of my vision. I was losing consciousness, and these guys were beating the daylights out of me, and I had like a complete total raw fear of understanding that was going to be the end. And something kind of changed in my mind at that point. I don't know if that's what changed, that's what made me really want to try to do things to try to live. It didn't really do that so much, but that fear was something that I had never really experienced ever in my life up until that point. To be honest, there isn't anything else like that fear at its purest form. There's nothing like that in life.